Hello, my name is Kieran Murphy, 35 years old. I am a geologist working for a mineral company in Denver, Colorado. If you ask me where I'm from, I'd say a small town called Havenfield, nestled alone amid the golden wheat fields of Nebraska. But if you ask where I truly belong, I'd shake my head because the answer isn't simple. I've spent my life searching for a place to call home, a place free from the stench of cheap liquor, the sound of shouting, or the bruises I once thought were an inevitable part of childhood. Today, sitting here looking out the window of my warm home, I want to tell you my story. A story of how a boy who grew up in pain found light, even though the path was filled with dark twists. Havenfield wasn't the kind of town you'd see on postcards. It was small, weathered, with a few bumpy main streets and a single bar that was always busier than the church. My house stood on the edge of town, a faded two-story wooden structure with peeling shingles and windows always shut tight to hide the secrets within. My father, Sean Murphy, was a mechanic, but he rarely worked. My mother, Maureen, used to be a cashier but quit when I was 5, saying no one needed her out there. Both were alcoholics, drinking cheap, strong liquor bought from the corner store. The alcohol made them laugh, made them cry, and sometimes made them fight, or worse, made them turn on me and my siblings. I was the eldest, born when my parents were still young and dreaming of a better life. But those dreams quickly faded, like steam rising from a hot cup of coffee. After me came Declan, 10 years younger, a blonde-haired boy with blue eyes who looked at me like I was a hero. Then there was Liam, the youngest, only 2 years old when I began to realize our family wasn't like the ones in storybooks. I loved my siblings more than anything, and I did everything to protect them, even if it meant taking on more pain myself. My childhood didn't have picnics or shiny new bicycles. It was sleepless nights, curled up in bed listening to the sound of breaking bottles and my mother's screams as my father lost another bet in a card game. I remember the first time I realized I was different. I was 7 and my elementary school teacher, Miss Harper, kept me after class. "Kieran," she said, her voice gentle but filled with concern, "are you okay? Your collar, it's torn and there's a bruise on your arm." I looked down at my arm where a dark bruise spread like a storm cloud. I lied, of course. "I fell playing ball, ma'am." Miss Harper didn't believe me, but she didn't press further. Even at that young age, I knew no one could help me. No one dared step into that house where even sunlight seemed reluctant to enter. My father wasn't always cruel. On rare days when he was sober, he'd sit on the porch steps and tell stories about our Irish ancestors, resilient farmers who survived famine and war. "Murphy blood is warrior blood," he'd say, his eyes gleaming with rare pride. I cherished those moments because they made me feel like he was still a father. But then he'd pick up the bottle and that father disappeared, replaced by a stranger whose fists were faster than his words. My mother was different. She didn't hit me, but her indifference hurt more. When I was 10, I brought home a drawing that my teacher had praised. I thought she'd be proud. But she only glanced at it, then turned away, muttering something about no room in this house for useless things. I stood there, holding the drawing, feeling like my heart was being crushed. I didn't hate her, I couldn't. I just wanted her to see me, truly see me, even once. But I didn't let those things destroy me. I found solace in books. The town library, a small building with the smell of old paper and creaky wooden floors, became my sanctuary. I read everything, from adventure stories to science books. That's where I discovered geology, the stories of rocks, mountains, and minerals hidden deep within the earth. I was fascinated by the idea that the earth, though old and scarred, held precious secrets within it. Maybe I thought I was like the earth, wounded on the outside, but with something valuable inside. As the eldest, I learned to be a shield for Declan and Liam. When my father got angry, I'd pull them into my room, lock the door, and tell stories to drown out the shouting. One day, I'd tell them, "We'll leave this place. We'll have a beautiful house with a green lawn and windows always open." Declan would nod, his eyes shining, and Liam would cling to me as if afraid I'd vanish. I wasn't making empty promises, I believed it. I had to believe it because otherwise I don't know how I would have survived. When I was 15, things got worse. My father lost his job at the auto shop after getting drunk and arguing with his boss. Money dried up and the beatings became more frequent. One night when I tried to stop him from hitting Declan for breaking a glass, he shoved me to the floor. I remember the cold wood against my back, the pounding of my heart in my ears, and the wild look in my father's eyes as he raised his hand. But then he stopped, stumbling out of the house, leaving me lying there, breathing heavily. Declan ran to me sobbing, and I held him, whispering that everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew I needed a plan. I started working after school, delivering newspapers in the mornings and cleaning at the grocery store on weekends. I hid the money in an old tin box, buried under a tree in the backyard. It wasn't just money, it was hope, a promise to my siblings that we'd escape this place. I studied harder than ever, sometimes staying up all night with a flashlight to review lessons because the electricity was often cut off. My science teacher saw my potential. She once told me, "Kieran, you're capable of great things. Fly high, fly far. Don't let this place hold you back." Her words were like a small flame, enough to warm me through the coldest days. But I wasn't always strong. Some nights when the house was dark, I sat alone and wondered if I deserved a better life. I loved my parents despite how they treated me. I remembered my mother singing lullabies when I was little, or how my father once taught me to throw a ball. Those memories made it impossible to hate them, but they also hurt more because I knew they'd never change. When I was 18, I received a full scholarship to a university in Colorado to study geology. It was the moment I'd waited for my whole life, a door to freedom. But when I told my parents, my mother gave a faint smile and my father said, "Don't think you're better than me just because you're going to college." I didn't argue. I packed my things, hugged Declan and Liam, promised to come back for them, and left Havenfield without looking back. As the bus carried me out of town, I looked out the window at the endless wheat fields stretching into the distance. I didn't cry, but my heart felt heavy. I wasn't just leaving my parents. I was leaving a part of myself, the boy who still hoped one day his family would become a real family. My luggage for starting my college journey was just a backpack with a few clothes and the tin box holding my savings. My destination was the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I'd received a full scholarship to study geology. It felt both freeing and terrifying, like walking a tightrope between the past and the future. Stepping into Boulder, I encountered a completely different world. No smell of cigarette smoke or sounds of arguing. No prying eyes from neighbors. Just tree-lined streets, the red brick buildings of the university, and fresh air that made me want to breathe deeply. But I still felt out of place. My classmates, with their brand new jackets and stories of family vacations, seemed to come from another planet. I hid in my worn-out sweater and borrowed textbooks from the library, trying to keep anyone from noticing how poor I was. The scholarship covered tuition and housing, but I worked any job I could find, washing dishes in the cafeteria, shoveling snow in winter, even delivering pizza at night. Some days I only slept 3 hours, but I didn't complain. Every dollar earned was a step closer to my promise to Declan and Liam. I sent money home when I could, knowing most of it would go to my parents drinking. I wrote letters to my siblings telling them about the mountains in Boulder, the rocks I found on field trips, and promising to bring them here someday. Declan replied with scribbled letters saying he was okay, but Liam, still young, only sent drawings of houses and smiling suns. Each letter was a stab, reminding me they were still trapped in Havenfield. Geology became my anchor. In class, I was captivated by lectures about volcanic eruptions and million-year-old rocks telling the Earth's story. I loved field trips, where I could touch rocks, feel their rough texture under my fingertips, and imagine the secrets they held. My professor, Dr. Bennett, a tall, lanky man with glasses sliding down his nose, noticed my passion. "You have an eye for it, Kieran," he said after a trip to the Rockies. "Rocks don't lie, but they tell stories to those who listen." His words made me feel valuable, like I wasn't just a boy from Havenfield, but someone who could achieve something. But no matter how hard I tried to fit in, the scars from my past didn't fade easily. I'd flinch when someone spoke loudly or shrink back if a friend accidentally touched my shoulder. I was terrified of people learning about my family, so I rarely spoke of Havenfield. When friends asked about my parents, I'd say, "They're just normal," and quickly change the subject. I built a wall around myself, letting no one in, afraid that if they saw the real me, they'd turn away. Then I met Sarah. It was the spring of 2011 when I was 21 and a junior in college. I went to the university library to borrow a book on mineralogy, and there she was, standing behind the counter, her brown hair tied up high and eyes as blue as the Colorado sky. She smiled when I handed her my library card, and I, awkward with words, could only mumble a thank you. "You like rocks, huh?" she said, glancing at the book. I used to think they were just rocks, but I saw a rose quartz once and it was beautiful, like a dream. Her voice was gentle, non-judgmental, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. We started dating slowly and naturally. Sarah was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was smart, funny, and saw the world with hope, as if everything could be fixed. She took me hiking in the mountains near Boulder, where we sat on rocks and watched the sunset. I told her about mineral deposits, how lithium, the metal sought after for electric car batteries, hid deep in the earth. She laughed, teasing that I loved rocks more than her, but her eyes said she understood. With Sarah, I wasn't the boy from Havenfield. I was Kieran, a man with dreams, someone worthy of love. At 23, I graduated with a geology degree and a job offer at a mineral exploration company in Denver. The pay wasn't high, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and save for Declan and Liam. Sarah found a job at a public library in Denver, and we began dreaming of a future together. I imagined a small house with shelves full of books and a garden where Sarah could grow flowers. For the first time, I dared to believe happiness was within reach. But the past didn't let go easily. I stayed in touch with my siblings, but my parents started calling more often, demanding money. "You're working now. You've got to take care of the family," my father said, his voice raspy over the phone. I sent money knowing it would go to liquor. I couldn't turn my back on them, not because I still loved them, but because I feared they'd take it out on Declan and Liam if I stopped. Sarah noticed my stress but didn't know the full truth. I didn't want her to see the weak part of me, the part still trapped in Havenfield. Then, when I was 25, Sarah said she wanted to meet my family. We'd been dating for over 4 years and she thought it was time. I panicked. I didn't want her to see the faded wooden house or hear my parents' arguments. But Sarah was patient, holding my hand and saying, "Kieran, I love you, not your past. I just want to understand you more." I agreed, though my heart pounded with fear. We drove to Havenfield one weekend. The house was the same but more run-down than I remembered. My father was drunk, slouched in an armchair with a bottle in hand, and my mother glared at Sarah like she was an intruder. Declan, now 15, hugged me tightly. Liam looked at me with cold eyes, as if blaming me for leaving them behind. Sarah tried to make conversation, but the air was so heavy I wanted to pull her out of there. When we left, she didn't say anything, just held my hand tightly. On the drive back, I apologized, but she shook her head. "You don't have to apologize for them, Kieran. You've done so much better than they ever did." That night in my small apartment, Sarah held me and I cried. For the first time in years, I let myself be vulnerable. She didn't judge or leave. She stayed, and I knew I wanted to be with her forever. I started thinking about a ring, about proposing, even though I didn't have much money. I wanted to build a family with Sarah, one nothing like the family I grew up in. But just when I thought things were falling into place, a call from my father changed everything. It was a winter evening. He called, his voice slurred but resolute. "Kieran, you need to come home. It's important." I asked what was wrong, but he only said, "Come back and you'll see." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to return to Havenfield, but something in his voice made it impossible to refuse. The drive back to Havenfield was long and heavy. I drove through snow-covered roads, the radio turned low to drown out my tangled thoughts. When I arrived in Havenfield, I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the suffocating feeling. Stepping inside, I saw my father slouched in his armchair, a bottle of whiskey in hand, his eyes bloodshot. My mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, looking at me with a heavy, oppressive gaze. "Kieran," my father began, his voice hoarse. "Sit down. I've got something to say." He took a swig of whiskey and continued. "Patrick O'Connell, my friend, has a proposition. His daughter, Norah, needs a husband, and I think you're the perfect choice." I froze, as if I'd been slapped. Patrick O'Connell was my father's high school friend, a hard-working and kind farmer who lived off his ranch and fields on the outskirts of Havenfield. His daughter, Norah, had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident a few years ago. I'd never met her, only heard in passing that she lived a reclusive life, rarely leaving home. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I'm not marrying anyone. I have my own life, and I already have Sarah as my girlfriend." My father sneered as if I'd said something foolish. "Sarah, that girl's not for you, Kieran. Patrick promised me, us, the family, $500,000 if you marry Norah. Think about it. With that money, we could turn our lives around. Don't you want your brothers to have a better life?" I stared at him, my heart pounding. $500,000. The number echoed in my head, not because I wanted it, but because I couldn't believe my father was willing to sell me for money. "You're insane," I said, my voice low but sharp. "I'm not doing it. I love Sarah." I turned to my mother, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she just stared at the floor, her lips pressed tightly together. "Kieran," my mother finally spoke, her voice soft but cutting. "You owe this family. Your father and I raised you, and now you dare turn your back on us? You think you're better than us just because you've got a college degree?" Her words were like a knife slicing into the old scars in my heart. Declan came downstairs. "Kieran, don't listen to them," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't have to do this." My father spun around, roaring, "Shut up, Declan, this isn't your business." I raised my hand to stop him, my eyes warning. "Don't touch him," I said, and for the first time I saw my father hesitate. But then he laughed, a twisted smile. "You'll agree, Kieran. You always do what I say, don't you?" I left the house that night, driving to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to find a way out. I thought of Sarah, her smile, the evenings we spent lying on the couch, dreaming of the future. I couldn't imagine a life without her. But I also thought of Declan and Liam, how $500,000 could get them out of Havenfield, give them the chance I never had. I hated myself for even considering the money, even for a second. The next morning, I was about to call Sarah when she called me first. Her voice was cold, distant. "Kieran, I want to break up." The words hit me like the world collapsing beneath my feet. I shook my head, not understanding. "Why? What did I do wrong?" She answered curtly, "You're not the right man for me, and your parents, I don't like them either." Her words were like shards of glass cutting into my heart. I begged her to explain, but she only said, "I'm sorry, Kieran." Then she hung up, and just like that, our sweet 4-year relationship ended in a way I couldn't comprehend. I don't remember how I drove back to my apartment in Denver. I only remember the emptiness, as if someone had carved a hole in my chest. Sarah was my light, the one who made me believe I could escape my past. When I got to the apartment, she was gone, leaving the place empty and cold. I sank to the floor, and I drank, something I'd sworn I'd never touch. But that day, I drank like I wanted to end my life. The days that followed were no brighter. Mornings, I went to work like a soulless shell. Evenings, I returned to the apartment and drank until I couldn't remember what happened. After about a month of living like an alcoholic just like my father, I decided I had to change. I returned to Havenfield not because I wanted to, but because I had nothing left to lose. That day, my father had arranged everything. Patrick O'Connell came to our house with his daughter. He thanked me for agreeing to marry Norah. He talked about the money, about how Norah needed someone to take care of her. I didn't listen. I just nodded, feeling like I was watching myself from a distance, like a stranger. Norah sat in her wheelchair, her black hair neatly tied back, her brown eyes sharp but wary. She didn't smile, saying nothing beyond a brief hello. I felt guilty looking at her, not out of pity, but because I knew we were both victims of the adults around us. "I don't want to force you," she said when we were left alone. "If you don't want this, just say no." Her voice was calm, but there was a deep sadness in it. I wanted to say no, to run from it all, but I didn't. "I'll marry you," I said, and she nodded, as if we'd both just signed a contract neither of us wanted. The wedding took place in a small, cold, empty church. I wore an old suit and Norah wore a simple white dress. No flowers, no music, just the greedy eyes of my parents and Declan standing in the corner looking at me with pain I couldn't face. When the priest asked if I took Norah as my wife, I wanted to scream no, that I loved Sarah, that I didn't want my life to be like this. But I only said I do. And that was it. After the wedding, Norah and I moved to a small house her father rented on the outskirts of Denver. We didn't talk much. She read books and I kept working at the mineral company downtown. I tried to stay busy. I didn't resent Norah, she wasn't to blame. But every night lying on the couch, I thought of Sarah, wondering where she was and why she left me. Those questions haunted me and I didn't know how to escape them. The house we lived in was a modest single-story home with faded cream-colored walls and creaky wooden floors that groaned with every step. It had a small living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom that I gave to Norah. I slept on the couch, covered with a thin blanket, staring at the ceiling in the dark. At first, we were like strangers forced to live together. I left for work early, came home late, and when I was home, I sat at the kitchen table reviewing geology reports or writing letters to Declan and Liam. Norah stayed in her room, the door slightly ajar, a faint golden glow from her desk lamp spilling out. She read books, thick novels or science books I wouldn't have expected her to enjoy. Sometimes I heard the sound of pages turning, the only thing breaking the silence between us. I didn't know what to say to Norah. Every time I looked at her, I felt a strange mix of guilt and helplessness. She didn't choose this marriage, just as I didn't. But there she was in her wheelchair with her neatly tied black hair and sharp brown eyes, as if watching me, waiting for something. I wanted to apologize, to tell her I didn't hate her, that I just didn't know how to live with all of this. But I didn't speak. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything would fall apart. Norah, on the other hand, seemed to need no words. She had a calmness that I both admired and found unsettling. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I came home late, drenched from the rain. She was sitting in the living room, a book on astrophysics open on her lap. "You should dry off or you'll catch a cold," she said, her voice even but not cold. I nodded, grabbed a towel from the kitchen, and when I returned, she was still looking at me. "You don't have to avoid me, Kieran," she said. "I know you don't want to be here, but we could at least try to talk, couldn't we?" Her words felt like a gentle punch. I sat down in the chair across from her, keeping my distance. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, though I knew it was a lie. "I just don't know where to start." Norah nodded as if she understood. "Then start with something simple," she said. "What do you do at the mineral company? I heard my dad say you're a geologist." I was surprised. No one besides Sarah had ever asked about my work with genuine curiosity. I started talking hesitantly at first about analyzing rock samples, looking for signs of minerals like lithium or cobalt. Norah listened, asking sharp questions about how minerals formed and the environmental impact of mining. I realized she wasn't just intelligent, she was passionate about learning, like I'd been about rocks as a kid. That night, we talked late, and for the first time, the house didn't feel stifling. Those conversations became a routine. Every evening after dinner, we sat in the living room sharing small stories. I told her about field trips to the Rockies, about a quartz crystal I found in college that sparkled like a star. Norah shared stories of her childhood, running through her father's fields before the accident took her legs. "I can't run anymore," she said once, her voice light but not sad. "But I learned to love other things, books, the sky, ideas." I looked at her, admiring her resilience, and wondered why I couldn't be as strong as she was. But it wasn't always easy. Some days I came home weighed down thinking of Sarah. I still dreamed of her, her smile, the way she held my hand as we walked under the sunset. I wondered if she was happy, if she thought of me the way I thought of her. On those days I grew distant, giving short answers when Norah asked how I was. She didn't push, but I saw her eyes, not angry but empathetic, as if she knew what I was struggling with. One day, about 3 months after the wedding, I found a small notebook on the kitchen table. Inside were Norah's neat handwritten notes about stars, constellations, and mathematical equations I couldn't understand. At the end, she'd written, "Everything has a reason, even if we don't see it yet." I closed the notebook, feeling like I'd intruded on something private, but her words echoed in my mind. I wanted to believe this marriage, the pain of losing Sarah, all had meaning. But I wasn't ready. That fall, Norah suggested we go to the backyard, a small patch overgrown with weeds. "I want to plant flowers," she said. "Will you help me?" I hesitated. I knew nothing about gardening, but her eager eyes made me agree. We spent that weekend with me digging the soil and Norah directing from her wheelchair, laughing loudly when I spilled a bag of fertilizer. "You're a disaster, Kieran," she teased, and I laughed for the first time in months. We planted daisies, sunflowers, and some lavender, which Norah said would make the house brighter. When we finished, my hands were caked with dirt and Norah had a smudge of mud on her cheek. I wiped it off without thinking, and she looked at me, her eyes so gentle I had to look away to hide my embarrassment. Moments like that began to change me. I realized I looked forward to coming home, to seeing Norah, to hearing her talk about a new book or tease me for my clumsy cooking. She had a way of making things lighter, as if she carried light within her despite the unfairness life had dealt her. One summer evening when I was 27, we sat in the backyard watching the first daisies bloom. The sky was full of stars, and Norah pointed out the Orion constellation, her voice brimming with passion. "Do you ever think about how small we are?" she asked. "All those stars, billions of years old, and we're just a moment." I looked at her, her black hair shimmering in the moonlight, and for the first time I didn't think of Sarah. I thought of Norah, how she made me want to live, truly live, instead of just existing. "Maybe we're small," I said, "but this moment, it's big enough for me." I don't know when I started loving Norah. Maybe it was when she smiled at me through the daisies. Maybe it was when she patiently listened to me vent about bad days at work, without judgment. Or maybe it was when I realized she didn't need me to take care of her. She was stronger than I'd imagined, and what she needed was a companion, not a savior. This love wasn't like the one I'd had with Sarah. With Sarah, love was a bright, blazing light, intense and overwhelming. With Norah, it was a small, steady flame, warming me through the coldest days. Then one day, as Norah and I were having dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and my heart stopped. Sarah stood there, her brown hair shorter, her blue eyes full of regret. "Kieran," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." I looked at her, feeling time rewind, and everything I thought I'd moved past came crashing back. Norah, from the dining table, looked at us, and though she said nothing, I saw her eyes, not jealous but worried, as if she feared I'd leave her. I invited Sarah in, but she shook her head. "Out here," she said. We stood on the porch, the air biting cold. Sarah took a deep breath and said, "Kieran, I need to tell you the truth. Your parents, They paid me to leave you. They said if I broke up with you, they'd give me money to start over. I agreed because I thought you'd be better off without me. But they didn't keep their promise, and I couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Her words were like a storm tearing through everything I believed. I stumbled, gripping the railing to keep from falling. "They paid you?" I asked, my voice breaking. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Kieran. I don't deserve forgiveness, but you need to know the truth." I wanted to scream, to drive to Havenfield and confront my parents, to ask why they ruined my life. But I just stood there, looking at Sarah, and realized I didn't love her anymore. Not because I was angry, but because my heart now belonged to the woman waiting for me inside that house. I told Sarah I forgave her, though I wasn't sure if I truly did. She left, and I went back inside, where Norah was still sitting, her eyes gentle but full of questions. "Are you okay?" she asked. I sat down, took her hand for the first time, and said, "I'll be okay, because I have you." Norah smiled, and in that moment I knew I'd found a true family. But life, as I've learned, is full of unexpected turns. One October morning, my phone rang incessantly. It was Norah's mother, her voice trembling over the line. "Kieran, your father-in-law, Patrick, he passed away last night. He had a heart attack." I was stunned, at a loss for words. Patrick O'Connell, my father-in-law, the hard-working and kind farmer, had always been a vital part of Norah's life. Though he was behind our arranged marriage, I never blamed him. He only wanted to protect his daughter, and I understood that better than anyone. I agonized over how to break the news to Norah, but when she heard the devastating news, I saw a chilling calmness that both awed and worried me. She didn't cry, just sat quietly in the living room, clutching the astrophysics book she loved. I sat beside her, unsure of what to do except be there. "Dad always wanted me to live well," she said after a while, her voice soft but resolute. "He wasn't perfect, but he believed in me." I nodded, holding her hand, and we navigated the grief together. Patrick's funeral took place on a drizzly day at a small cemetery near his farm in Havenfield. Watching Norah place a bouquet of daisies on his casket, I vowed to ensure she never felt alone. Patrick left Norah a will, and in it was a vast piece of land on the outskirts of Colorado, near the Rockies. It was a plot he'd bought cheaply years ago, mostly barren hills and rocky soil, where he dreamed of building a family home. Everyone in Havenfield thought the land was worthless, too remote for development, too harsh for farming. Norah and I had no immediate plans for it. We were busy with daily life, and I was focused on a new project at work, analyzing data from a mine in Nevada. But fate had its own plans. One weekend, I decided to visit the land, partly out of curiosity, partly to give Norah and me a break from the city. We drove out of Denver, winding through roads that led to a rugged, open expanse where grass grew sparsely and gray rocks stretched beneath the mountains. Norah sat beside me, gazing out the window, her eyes distant. "Dad called this place his pipe dream," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "He thought it would be worth something someday, but no one believed him." I laughed, thinking it was just ordinary land, but when I stepped out of the car, something caught my eye. As a geologist, I'm trained to notice small signs, a glint of mineral, an unusual rock formation. When I picked up a small stone, it felt heavier than normal, its surface shimmering with a metallic sheen. My heart raced. I walked the land, collecting more samples, and realized these weren't just pebbles. I brought them to the company lab that Monday, and after a week of analysis, the results were unbelievable. The land held a massive lithium deposit, a rare mineral in high demand for electric vehicle batteries. With lithium prices soaring, this deposit, if mined, could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I rushed home, papers in hand, my heart pounding as if it might burst. Norah was in the backyard in her wheelchair, tending to the vibrant daisies under the afternoon sun. "Norah, you need to see this," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, almost shouting. I knelt beside her, spreading the documents on the ground, numbers and charts dancing before my eyes. I explained, perhaps a bit chaotically, about lithium, about her father's supposedly worthless land, about the life-changing potential. It could be worth hundreds of millions, Norah. Hundreds of millions. She looked at me, her brown eyes wide, then burst into laughter, a clear, resonant laugh that echoed through the garden. "Dad really had a dream," she said, her voice a mix of astonishment and pride. "He always said this land was special, but no one believed him. He knew, didn't he?" I nodded, laughing loudly, feeling like kids again, covered in mud from planting daisies. I pulled her into a hug. That moment wasn't just a discovery. It was a door opening to a future I'd never dared to dream of. We didn't rush. I took the rock samples and data to the mineral company where I worked and presented them to my colleagues. They were stunned. But I saw my boss, Mr. Harris, his eyes lighting up like when I was an intern pitching a wild idea. "Kieran, if you're right, this is huge," he said, clapping my shoulder. Over the next months, I worked day and night collaborating with engineers and major mining companies to appraise the deposit. Finally, a mining conglomerate agreed to buy the extraction rights for $250 million, plus shares in the project. The day the money hit our account, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the numbers on the bank screen. Digits that felt like a dream too surreal to be true. Norah held my hand, her fingers intertwined tightly with mine, and asked, "We can do anything, Kieran. But what do you want?" I looked into her eyes, seeing the night sky reflected in them, and said, "I want us to be happy. Truly happy." We moved to a new house in Boulder, a 2-story home with large windows overlooking the Rockies where the sunrise painted the peaks golden each morning. The sprawling backyard became Norah's paradise, where she planted hundreds of flowers, white daisies, sunflowers, and fragrant lavender bushes. Inside, we dedicated a corner to a small library with wooden shelves filled with novels, science books, and the astrophysics texts Norah loved. She began writing a book, pages filled with ideas about stars and the universe, as if she were reaching for dreams once confined by her wheelchair. I continued working at the mineral company, but now I led a research team focused on sustainable mining projects, ensuring deposits like ours brought profit without harming the environment. Every day I drove home to find Norah reading or writing in her library corner, and I knew I'd found a place to belong. The windfall wasn't just about money. It was about freedom. Freedom to live as my true self, to heal the scars from Havenfield. I sent a large sum to Declan and Liam, helping them escape that haunting wooden house. Declan, now 20, enrolled in engineering at the University of Colorado, his eyes lighting up when he talked about designing bridges and buildings. Liam, 17, discovered a passion for painting, his canvases bursting with color as if he were repainting a world he once didn't dare dream of. I rented them a spacious apartment near campus, with windows overlooking a park so they'd never have to hear the sound of breaking bottles or shouting again. Each visit, seeing Declan laugh heartily or Liam wielding a paintbrush, lifted a weight from my shoulders, as if I'd kept the promise I made years ago on that bus leaving Havenfield. Norah and I began to dream bigger. We established a charitable foundation named after Patrick, honoring the kind farmer whose land changed our lives. The foundation supported young people who, like me, had been abandoned or mistreated by their families. We provided scholarships for college, rented apartments to give them safe places to live, and organized counseling sessions to help them heal. Each thank you letter from someone like Mia, a 16-year-old dreaming of becoming a doctor, was a spark of light, reminding me I was doing the right thing. But even though my life was now filled with light, Norah, Declan, Liam, the shadows of my past still lurked, waiting to pull me back. It was the winter of 2020. I was in my office at the mineral company analyzing data from a new mine in Wyoming when my phone buzzed. My mother's number flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the reject button, but a part of me, the boy still hoping his parents would change, made me answer. "Kieran," my mother said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "your father and I want to visit. It's been a long time, hasn't it?" I gripped the pencil in my hand, feeling the air in the room thicken. I knew they weren't coming to visit. They never did. I'll arrange something, I replied coldly, hanging up before she could say more. I drove home, my mind in turmoil. Norah was in the small library of our new Boulder home finishing the final chapter of her book on astrophysics. She looked up as I entered, immediately noticing the tension on my face. "It's your parents again, isn't it?" she asked, setting her pen down. I nodded, sitting across from her, and told her about the call. Norah listened, as she always did, without interrupting. When I finished, she took my hand, her warm fingers intertwining with mine. "Kieran, you don't have to see them if you don't want to. You've already given them too much." I looked into her eyes, seeing both resolve and concern, and I knew she was right. But I also knew I needed to face them, not for their sake, but for mine. I reached out to Declan for information. He told me, his voice thick with bitterness, that our parents had squandered the $500,000 from Patrick O'Connell, the money they received for forcing me to marry Norah. Declan said they bought a new truck, paid off my father's gambling debts, and spent the rest on liquor and pointless trips. "They're broke, Kieran," Declan said over the phone. "Now they've heard about the lithium mine and they think you owe them." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling the old bruises on my arms throb again. I wasn't surprised, but the pain was still sharp, like a blade I couldn't dodge. A week later, my parents showed up at our doorstep in Boulder. I opened the door to find them standing there. My father, Sean, with disheveled gray hair and bloodshot eyes, and my mother, Maureen, in a worn sweater, a forced smile on her lips. "Kieran, my boy," my father said, his voice trying to sound warm. "Nice house. You've done well." I didn't respond, just invited them in and led them to the living room. Norah was there in her wheelchair, her eyes sharp but calm. She nodded in greeting but said nothing, leaving it to me to handle. We sat down, the air heavy like the calm before a storm. My father got straight to the point. "Kieran, I heard you made a fortune from that mine. You've got to share with your family. Your mother and I have nothing left." My mother nodded, adding, "You're the eldest son, Kieran. You have a responsibility to us." Their words were like an old script, echoing the days when they forced me to work to support the family, when they took the money I saved from delivering newspapers, but this time, I wasn't that 15-year-old boy anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest tighten. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice low but firm, "I gave you $500,000 from Patrick. You spent it all. I don't owe you anything anymore." My father scoffed as if I'd said something absurd. "Who do you think you are, Kieran? You're rich now and you turn your back on your family. You wouldn't be anything without me and your mother." My mother chimed in, her voice trembling. "You can't abandon us like this. We're your blood." I looked at them, seeing not my parents, but two strangers trapped in their own selfishness. I thought of the nights I lay curled up, listening to bottles shatter, of the times I shielded Declan and Liam, of how they manipulated my life. And then I thought of Sarah, my first love, the one they paid to leave me. I'd never confronted them about it, but now I knew I had to. "You paid Sarah to leave me," I said, my voice calm but icy. "You destroyed the best thing in my life back then. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" My father froze, his eyes widening, but then he shook his head, sneering. "That girl wasn't good for you, Kieran. Aren't you living the dream now?" My mother lowered her head, muttering, "We just wanted a better future for you." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "A better future?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "You did it for the money, not for my future. You never thought of me, only of yourselves." Norah spoke up for the first time from the corner of the room. "Can't you see?" she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Kieran has done everything for this family, even when you treated him terribly. Now he has the right to live his own life." My father glared at Norah, as if about to retort, but her unwavering gaze silenced him. I looked at Norah, gratitude swelling in my chest. She was my strength, the reason I didn't crumble. I stood up, pointing to the door. I'm not giving you any more money. Don't come back. I have my family, Norah, Declan, and Liam. You're not my family anymore." Those words cut like a blade, but they also set me free. My father roared, calling me ungrateful, but my mother pulled him out, her eyes filled with resentment. When the door closed, I stood there, my breathing heavy, feeling as if I'd just run a marathon. Norah wheeled over to me, placing her hand on mine. "You did the right thing," she said. I knelt down, hugged her, and for the first time I cried for my parents. Not out of grief, but because I was free. But amid the tears, a strange thought flickered. If my parents hadn't destroyed my relationship with Sarah, if they hadn't forced me to marry Norah, I wouldn't have this life. Not Norah, not the foundation, not the evenings watching the Rockies. I hated what they did, but I couldn't deny that in a strange way they led me here. I whispered this to Norah, and she smiled, brushing my hair. "Sometimes the worst things lead us to the best," she said. "But you don't owe them thanks. You built this life yourself." Looking back on my journey, I see that the path from Havenfield to Boulder was far from a straight line. It was full of twists, deep valleys, and moments when I thought I wouldn't make it through. My parents, with all they did, the beatings, the indifference, the manipulation of my first love with Sarah, left scars that will never fully disappear. But those scars also became the map that led me here. If they hadn't forced me to marry Norah, I wouldn't have her, our garden full of flowers, or our evenings stargazing. If they hadn't destroyed my relationship with Sarah, I might have lived a different life, but I'm not sure it would have been as meaningful as this one. I don't thank them. They don't deserve it, but I accept that, in fate's strange way, the worst things led me to the best. If I could speak to the 15-year-old Kieran curled up in that wooden house, I'd tell him, "Keep going, don't give up. The darkest days will lead you to light, but you have to keep moving, even when you're afraid." And if I had advice for anyone reading this story, struggling with a toxic family or invisible wounds, this is what I'd say. You are not what others do to you. You are what you choose to do with yourself. Find people who truly love you, seize opportunities no matter how small, and trust that, no matter how long the road, you'll find the light. I did, and you can too. Life doesn't promise to be easy, but it promises to be worth living if you dare to keep going. And I, Kieran Murphy, kept going. I found my true family, built a life based on love and truth, and I'll never stop dreaming big. Because I know, as Norah once said, each of us is a story. And my story, though it began in darkness, is now shining brighter than ever.